On the 26th of November, 1922, the archaeologist Howard Carter peered through a small opening into a hidden chamber. Having searched long and far, he had found the greatest discovery of his career, and when prompted for a description, murmured that he saw wonderful things. He was likely too awed to notice the inscription on a stone tablet warning trespassers that death will slay with wings whoever disturbs the peace of the Pharaoh. By 1929, 20 people involved in the opening of the tomb, including Lord Carnarvon and his benefactor, died prematurely. Was that coincidence, or was there really a curse of Tutankhamun? But who was Tutankhamun, and why was his curse so feared? The boy king was the heir to a man called Anakhtenon, the first monotheistic king, pharaoh in recorded history. He abandoned the capital city of Thebes and established a new capital, Akhenaton, in Tel El-Amarna. His change from pantheism to monotheism would bring around his ultimately demise, enabling his son, or as we understand it, son-in-law, Tutankhamun, to ascend and return Egypt to pantheism. It is not known how the boy king met his own demise, but it was his own high priest, a man called Aya, who seized power. After his death, a general known as Horemheb seized power, seeking to erase the name of the boy king from history by destroying his temples and houses. The only thing he did not destroy was the tomb itself, perhaps because he couldn't locate it, but there would have been high priests who knew of it, who could be bought or persuaded to reveal its location. Or perhaps Horemheb let it be for another reason. The ancient Egyptians believed in curses. They believed in spirits and demons that could guard secret places and strike down dead those who attempted to rob or trespass in these sacred places. Horemheb himself would have known of any of these curses, and may very well have decided to leave Tutankhamun alone, as he feared the reprisals that could have happened to him. Perhaps Mr. Carter and his party, as we will see, should have heeded that warning. The man who eventually discovered the tomb was no stranger to Egypt. Howard Carter was made Chief Inspector of Monuments while only 20 years old, and convinced his first benefactor, the American Theodore Davis, to begin excavating the Valley of the Kings in 1902. By 1914, Davis was convinced that all that could be found had been found within the Valley of the Kings, and broke off with Carter, as he was convinced that Tutankhamun's tomb had already been discovered, as he had recently unearthed an impressive pit containing gold plates. Into this void stepped Lord Carnarvon, who suspected Davis was wrong, and he was convinced that Tutankhamun's tomb had yet to be discovered, and thus commissioned Carter to seek it out. World War I interfered considerably with the excavation, and by 1922, Lord Carnarvon was losing faith in the project. But Carter convinced him of one more dig, as he was convinced the breakthrough was about to be made. And so it was. On November 1st, 1922, a ditch was dug southward of the tomb of Ramesses IV, reading 12 steps leading to a sealed stone gate. Elated, Carter telegrammed to Carnarvon, who arrived 2 weeks later, and together they ventured forward and found untouched and unspoiled the tomb of the boy king. Within were, as Carter described, wonderful things: gilded couches, life-size figures, and gold chariots, and the eponymous warning. The grand opening was attended on February the 17th by distinguished guests who were overwhelmed by the wealth around them, but Lord Carnarvon was never to see it. Carnarvon died in April 1923, possibly from an infected mosquito bite, and while his family sat by his bedside, the room suddenly extinguished. All light was gutted out, followed again by a power cut. A power cut that the Cairo Board of Electricity never explained adequately. Lord Carnarvon's body was then expatriated, and it was found upon his return that his fox terrier, most beloved, had died and howled at almost the exact same time. The newspapers were quick to begin printing papers filled with gossip of a curse. Carnarvon himself was likely cause of this, as he sold the rights of the news of the day to the London Times, and those journalists who were following the scent were quickly rewarded. Over a few years, over 13 people who had ventured into that tomb or encountered the Boy King had died prematurely. Lady Carnarvon herself died of an insect bite in 1929, followed by numerous others. Arthur Mace, another archaeologist who had helped unseal the tomb, fell into a coma and died. George Gould visited Egypt and was taken into the tomb by Carter. The next day he was dead. Joel Wool, an industrialist who visited the site, died of a fever on his return to England, as did another prominent scientist such as Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, and Douglas Reed, who performed the autopsy on the Boy King. The story of the supposed curse was cemented in the common discourse by Philip Vanderberg in his book, The Curse of the Pharaohs. Here, he lists the deaths we have already seen, but adds many more, and in the case of many of these deaths involved a curious exhaustion, including Carter himself, who rather than being elated with the find of the millennium, seems to have shrunk into a peculiar depression. A rational explanation may be the humidity, heat, and harsh conditions to be found within the Valley of the Kings. This was before vaccinations against malaria and polio and other exotic diseases, as well as there being a distinct lack of antibiotics, but the sheer volume of deaths all associated with one dig. To this, Vanderberg speculates that perhaps the ancient priesthood of Egypt may have had knowledge of slow-releasing fungoid or poisons that could linger over centuries or even millennia, and that the ancient Egyptians designed the pyramids to harness cosmic radiation and power. Chronic fatigue is a symptom of radiation sickness. Did Horemheb fear this? Is that why he didn't destroy the tomb? Or were all these deaths a remarkable coincidence? Did the ancients in Egypt and other ancient civilizations such as the Aztec believed that a guardian spirit or demon could be attached to a place to ward off invaders, and the Egyptians were not alone in this belief? Max Freedom Long, an investigator of the paranormal, studied the kahunas of Hawaii, who could allegedly invoke a death prayer, which Long discovered involves disembodied spirits who could be bound to a place and obey their owner's whim, such as invoking a death prayer. Incidentally, Long suspected the kahunas to have their origins in Egypt. The kahunas and the ancient Egyptians believed that a human being exists on several different layers of reality, and Long was convinced that Carter and the other individuals who opened that tomb were victims of a death prayer of sorts. The kahunas and the ancient Egyptians had a secret. What that secret was, few have found out, but many have gone to their graves looking for it. In his book, A Search in Secret Egypt, the English occultist Paul Brunton spent a night in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. During his stay, he described feeling that he was not alone, which progressed into an atmosphere of hostility and antagonism as grotesque figures formed around him, followed by a strange feeling of benevolence, and that he thought he could see the shapes of priests. Vanderberg himself goes on to quote Brunton in his book. What we know of the ancient Egyptians is far in deficit to what we do, and what we do know is still a mystery and unknown. Was this all a remarkable coincidence? Was there indeed some ancient trap set by those who built the tomb? Or was it there was truly some metaphysical agency at work? Death will slay on wings those who disturb the Pharaoh. It's conceivable that Horemheb observed that warning and kept down. If Carter had done so, would his company and all those who encountered the Boy King have lived longer? It may be wise to consider that should you ever find yourself in such a setting, heed the warnings.